Madara versus Sukuna is obvious, but there is a reason Gege Akutami and Masashi Kishimoto both had to personally intervene in order to get them out of the narrative. Both were too strong to be defeated using traditional means. Though, how do they compare to each other? Let's find out. I'll also show you how the Dabura versus Mahoraga fight in Jujutsu Kaisen Modulo adds some extra context to this matchup, and how this comparison itself is the perfect way to bring some much-needed clarity to Sukuna's power scaling. To understand the matchup, we first have to look at what they represent in their respective worlds. In Naruto, Madara represents the pinnacle of chakra prowess. He's the only one since Hagoromo Otsutsuki to become the 10 Tails Jinchuriki, and what makes him so overpowered is the overwhelming stat gap between him and everyone else. Similarly, Sukuna represents the pinnacle of cursed energy. He has twice the reserves of Yuta, who already has more than Gojo, and his jujutsu knowledge is completely unsurpassed. There's a reason Gojo himself admitted that even if Sukuna hadn't used the 10 shadows, he still would not have won. Next, let's talk about how these two were actually taken out of the story. Madara was so powerful that Kishimoto had to introduce a new antagonist to replace him. Meanwhile, Gege had to put Sukuna through a gauntlet of every relevant sorcerer in order to chip away at his soul and his output bit by bit, and also bring back a presumably dead character, until finally, Sukuna had nothing left to give. They both haunted their narratives, and they both gave us generational performances, but put them against each other, and you get an unreasonably straightforward matchup. Let's start with the most debatable part of this matchup, their speed. Power scalers in both verses love to highball their favorite characters, so let me show you how things actually look when you strip away the hype. We'll start with Sukuna. His best speed feats include reacting to Kashimo's electromagnetic waves, as well as managing to slash the same waves with his world-cutting slash. Both are incredible feats. After all, electromagnetic waves travel at the speed of light. And it's not a reach either when you factor in Dabura's curse technique, and how it's part of the same verse. However, we have to be careful with how we categorize this. Dodging an electromagnetic wave is a feat of reaction speed, and cutting one is a feat of attack speed. Sukuna's actual combat speed is naturally lower. It's still impressive. For example, even in a weakened state, in chapter 246, Sukuna managed to blitz Choso's piercing blood, which, as we already know, moves at the speed of sound. So we can comfortably call Sukuna's combat speed hypersonic at the very least, and likely relativistic, but still below the speed of light. Now, while Sukuna is relatively easy to place when you take out the noise, Madara is where things get complicated. Even in his base form, Madara could mog the 4th Raikage, a man whose speed was beyond the perception of Sasuke's Mangekyo Sharingan. Keep in mind the Raikage was also fast enough to dodge Amaterasu, which is typically impossible to avoid. Chapter 463 also made it clear that Sasuke had nothing that could allow him to keep up with Raikage's speed. Yet by chapter 563, Madara was handling that same speed no problem. At this point, you can already argue that Madara's reaction speed at its lowest is already where you highball Sukuna's speed. This is especially true when he's using the Susanoo, as Obito stated that the Susanoo's speed actually surpasses the user's own. But if you're still not convinced, the feats only get clearer as the story progresses. For example, in chapter 661, we see one Rinnegan Madara from before even becoming the 10 Tails Jinchuriki casually dodging a point-blank flying Raijin slash from Tobirama. Tobirama was the fastest shinobi back when Madara and Hashirama were still around, and the flying Raijin slash he was using here is an instantaneous space-time teleportation jutsu, not a movement based on physical speed. Anyone who can actually react to it scales even above its speed. Simply put, this is a much better feat than anything we've seen from Sukuna, and it's from before Madara became a 10 Tails Jinchuriki. Next up, we have to talk about attack potency, and the big question here is, can Sukuna actually hurt Madara? I know power scalers lowball the Jujutsu Kaisen verse when it comes to raw destructive power, and to be fair, it makes sense why they do it. When you look at the scale of an offensive jutsu compared to a typical curse technique, the gap looks massive. But before you dismiss Sukuna's damage output, we have to look at Yuki's black hole. We have actual confirmation that if Yuki's black hole hadn't been held back by Tengen's barrier and Yuki's own willpower, it would have literally dragged the entire world down with it. This means that planetary attack potency is possible in the Jujutsu Kaisen verse. Now, obviously Yuki is not Sukuna, so you might think this feat isn't relevant to him, but you'd be wrong. The reason I'd bring this up is to show that Jujutsu Kaisen is very dependent on conceptual powers rather than just raw physical stats. There is a reason you cannot bypass Gojo's infinity regardless of how fast you go. It's because speed doesn't matter, because the rule of the technique is that you never arrive. To win, you either have to negate the technique or have a conceptual counter. We saw the same logic with Yuki's black hole. It was countered because Kenjaku specifically brought out Yuji's mother's anti-gravity technique. Next, take Yorozu's perfect sphere for example. In the real world, the perfect sphere is mathematically impossible. No matter how smooth an object looks, it can never be completely smooth at a subatomic level because it's made of discrete particles. But Yorozu's technique technique ignores the laws of physics to create one anyway, and because the sphere is mathematically perfect, it has zero surface area. In physics, when you have force applied to a point of zero area, you get infinite pressure. This means Yorozu's sphere has an infinite level of attack potency. It destroys anything it touches, no matter how durable the target is. The only reason Sukuna managed to survive and counter it is because Mahoraga had already adapted to it. Then we have Madara's attack potency. We know he can summon meteors whose impact was felt throughout the entire land of lightning. Plus, his truth-seeking orbs are functionally identical to Yorozu's true sphere in how they work. They are effectively erase buttons that destroy anything on contact. So if Madara is faster, has higher physical stats, and possesses similar erasure-based attacks as the best that Jujutsu Kaisen has to offer, what is even left to discuss? Well, let's move past the stats and talk about Sukuna's actual win conditions and how they would go against Madara. We'll start with Malevolent Shrine. This is a guaranteed hit omnidirectional meat grinder. The moment you're caught inside it, you are subjected to cleave and dismantle relentlessly from every direction. However, this simply won't work on Madara. If Sukuna opens his domain expansion, Madara can just stay still and welcome it. The slashes won't matter because the Ten Tails makes him functionally immortal thanks to near instantaneous regeneration. All Madara has to do is stand there, prove to Sukuna that his domain expansion is not a problem, and then one-shot him in any number of ways. And to make it even worse for Sukuna, let's bring out Madara's Limbo clones. These are clones that exist in an invisible world that coexist with our physical world. They are impossible to detect or perceive, yet they can interact with the physical world just fine. Basically, Madara can bring out 4 clones, each just as strong as the real Madara, who are completely untrackable and functionally invulnerable. It is impossible to evade or fight them unless you possess the power of the 6 paths, which is something Sukuna obviously doesn't have. So imagine this. Madara is standing in the middle of the shrine, getting slashed to pieces and healing instantly, while he sends a Limbo clone to attack Sukuna at point-blank range. The clone can just tap Sukuna with a Truth Seeker orb and erase his brain. It would be a perfect W. And just to smear some mud on the Jujutsu Kaisen fans, this would happen inside Sukuna's own domain, the supposed pinnacle of his Jujutsu. Now, I know some of you are going to ask, can the world-cutting slash counter the clones? The answer is a hard no. As I said, Sukuna has no way to perceive these clones. At least with Gojo's Infinity, he knew there was a target to aim at, but Sukuna has no way to perceive something that doesn't technically exist in his world. I'd even argue that Gojo's 6 eyes wouldn't be able to perceive Limbo. It is the ultimate win condition. It's so broken that even in a fight like Goku versus Madara, where Madara is totally fodder to Goku, he would still win by having a Limbo clone shoot Goku through the chest when he isn't looking. Besides, the world-cutting slash works by cutting the space, the world, and the existence of where Sukuna is targeting. But the Limbo world, while coexisting with the physical world, is a separate space entirely. By all means, it is a different dimension. This means even a slash that cuts the world would be completely immune to the Limbo clones, because they simply aren't in the world Sukuna is cutting. Okay, now let's say it's not Ten Tails Madara. Let's look at base Edo Tensei Madara. Can he counter the Malevolent Shrine just as well? Actually, yes. Madara has the perfect body Susanoo, and considering the Susanoo has significantly higher stats than the user themselves, it should be able to handle any number of cleaves and dismantles. Of course, we know that Sukuna can adjust its power depending on the target's toughness and cursed energy level, but it's not an invincible attack. We've seen many characters tank Sukuna's slashes. There's no way Madara with the Susanoo won't be able to handle these same slashes. The only way Sukuna breaks through is if he starts using world-cutting slashes within the domain, which would require him to create a completely new variation of Malevolent Shrine. While that's not impossible for a genius like Sukuna, you have to remember that Madara still has the Mangekyo, the Rinnegan, and superior combat speed. He just needs to fry Sukuna's brain once to end the fight, so the odds are still heavily against the King of Curses. Not to mention, we've already seen Maki perceive and dodge Sukuna's world-cutting slash. If she can do it, there's no world where Madara with his precognitive dojutsu cannot. So, does that mean Madara has a way to deal with every single one of Sukuna's win conditions? Essentially, yes. But we haven't talked about the wild card yet, Mahoraga. Let's bring in Mahoraga and say everything goes right for Sukuna and everything goes wrong for Madara. Would Sukuna still not have a chance? You see, Mahoraga's ability is to adapt to any and all phenomena. We have already seen it adapt to Gojo's Infinity, which meant bypassing an infinite distance. And we also saw it adapt to Yorozu's True Sphere, which meant countering an infinite force. Now, just imagine if Mahoraga manages to adapt to the Truth Seeker orbs, or Limbo, or as some fans would say, even the Rinnegan itself. Sure, Mahoraga's adaptation is easier said than done, and Madara would have hundreds of ways to one-shot him. But again, we are assuming a scenario where everything goes right for Sukuna, and I'm sure you're curious, what exactly would a conceptual counter to the Truth-Seeking Orbs or Limbo even look like? To answer that, let me catch you up on Mahoraga's generational performance against Dabura. Dabura's second curse technique, Light, allows him to fire piercing light beams that can be solidified into constructs or used to move at sub-light speeds. It's a technique built on pure energy and speed. And what do you know? As Dabura uses this in Mahoraga, the wheel turns. Once the adaptation is complete, Mahoraga becomes a conceptual counter to Light itself. This is massive. If Mahoraga can adapt to infinite distance, infinite pressure, and now Dabura's Light technique, it means there is effectively no limit to his ceiling. Unless you destroy Mahoraga before the adaptation is complete, you are eventually forced to fight an opponent who perfectly counters whatever it is that you were using to fight it. I mean, let's say Mahoraga fights Goku. If Goku does the usual, where he starts off low and slowly powers up, the situation would end up exactly like the Goku versus Broly fight. Eventually, Mahoraga reaches a point where Goku simply cannot keep up anymore, at least when it comes to raw strength. Now, if Mahoraga is really all that, what happens if everything goes right for Sukuna and Mahoraga actually adapts to Madara? Well, if Madara doesn't recognize Mahoraga as a priority 1 threat and delete him instantly, he's going to find himself in a very interesting matchup. Let's start with the Truth Seeker Orbs. It's arguably Madara's most versatile ability. We're talking about spheres of localized destruction that erase anything they touch on a molecular level. Functionally, they are the ultimate attack. But remember, we've already seen Mahoraga adapt to Yorozu's True Sphere. He has already learned how to exist in a space occupied by infinite pressure and matter erasure. If he pulls the same trick against Madara, the moment the wheel turns against a Truth Seeker Orb, Mahoraga's biology would likely shift to become non-reactive to that high-density chakra. We already know that Sage Jutsu is effective at countering Truth Seeker Orbs, so all Madara needs to learn is how to leverage Sage Jutsu and then also become a conceptual void that the orbs simply cannot interact with. Next, let's look at what happens if Mahoraga adapts to Limbo. As I mentioned earlier, Limbo is the near-perfect win condition because it exists in a space Sukuna cannot perceive, but Mahoraga's adaptation is not limited to what he can see. It's an adaptation to the phenomenon itself. If a Limbo clone strikes Mahoraga and fails to one-shot him, the wheel will turn. Eventually, Mahoraga would adapt to the very concept of the Limbo world. His perception would evolve to bridge the gap between dimensions. He would essentially pull the Limbo clones into his field of perception. Naturally, he'd then also become able to hurt them, and more importantly, he would provide Sukuna with the context needed to evolve his own abilities to fight back. But we can go even further, as I'm sure many of you want to know, what happens if Mahoraga adapts to the Rinnegan itself? First, I have to clarify a major misconception. Mahoraga does not adapt to biological traits or stats. It adapts to the techniques and phenomena empowered by them. For example, in Shinjuku, Mahoraga did not adapt to Gojo's 6 eyes. Rather, it adapted specifically to Unlimited Void and then to Infinity. The reason is simple. The 6 eyes themselves aren't attacking Mahoraga. They are a passive tool for processing information, and because they don't exert a force or a phenomenon onto him, there is nothing for the wheel to turn against. It's the same story with the Rinnegan. Mahoraga cannot adapt to the fact that Madara has the Rinnegan. However, it can adapt to the abilities those eyes produce. As I said with the Limbo clones, that is a phenomenon, an active technique interacting with the world. The same goes for the gravitational push of Shinra Tensei or the soul ripping of the human path. These are events that occur in reality, and once Mahoraga is subjected to them, the wheel begins to spin. This distinction is critical. After the Goku-Broly comparison, it's easy to think Mahoraga can just adapt to being a counter indefinitely, but that's not how it works. Mahoraga adapts to phenomena, which by definition is when a power or law of physics is being used in practice. An even simpler way to understand this is to imagine you're fighting Todoroki from My Hero Academia. If Todoroki only uses his ice, Mahoraga will only adapt to the ice. Mahoraga would be in the dark about Todoroki's fire. You see, Mahoraga is a reactive fighter, not a proactive one. The wheel has to turn 4 to 5 times for the adaptation to complete, and the more complex a phenomenon is, the longer it takes. Mahoraga adapting to Gojo wouldn't have worked if Sukuna didn't have the brilliant plan of first using Megumi's soul to bear the burden of Unlimited Void, and then using his own soul to bear the burden of Limitless. If Sukuna had not outsourced the burden of adaptation, the adaptation wouldn't have worked out as smoothly, and Gojo would have also been onto him. We see this exact limitation play out in the Dabura fight in Modulo. Dabura's light technique is fast and destructive, but the only reason Mahoraga survived long enough to counter it was that Dabura didn't realize the adaptation was happening. This is why, even if everything goes right, Madara will always have the advantage of time and options. Mahoraga only adapts to one thing at a time, so even if we assume Sukuna has Megumi's soul to tank the burden of Limbo clones, and then has Mahoraga move on to Truth Seeker orbs, Madara would basically have to sit there, have a cup of tea, and release Walmart versions of his attacks to actively help Mahoraga finish the adaptation. Do you see what I'm getting at? Madara would have to actively cooperate for the fight to go Sukuna's way. And even then, what happens? We saw Sukuna finish Mahoraga with Divine Flame and Gojo destroy him with Hollow Purple. Even Dabura, once he realized what was happening, simply dropped his light techniques and started brawling. If Mahoraga adapted to Limbo and Truth Seeker orbs, the stat gap is still so massive that Madara can just pivot to a different jutsu and one-shot him. So how about we downgrade the matchup? What if it's not the 10 tails? What if it's just base Edo Tensei Madara with the fake Rinnegan? Can Sukuna win then? Well, not exactly. Even here, Sukuna is fighting an uphill battle against the fundamental nature of the Naruto power system. First, there is Edo Tensei factor. Madara has infinite chakra and a body that regenerates from everything. Then you have the perfect Susanoo, Mangekyo abilities, and deep pockets with plenty of jutsu. And Madara can also use genjutsu. Just like Unlimited Void fried Sukuna's brain, a high-level genjutsu could do the exact same thing. And sure, maybe Sukuna tries to redirect the genjutsu to Megumi's soul so Mahoraga can adapt. But even if everything goes right and Madara is facing a hypothetical Mahoraga that has adapted to genjutsu, the Susanoo, and everything else, Madara still has Izanagi. He can literally rewrite reality itself. I mean, if Edo Tensei Itachi could use Izanami, there's no reason Edo Tensei Madara can't use Izanagi. In the end, while it's true that many fans misunderstand Sukuna's speed and the depth of Mahoraga's adaptation, there is still simply no way for Sukuna to win. Even catching Madara off guard with a world-cutting slash doesn't work. An Edo Tensei body would just pull itself back together. Well, maybe if Sukuna uses his anti-Madara technique that he hasn't used since the Heian era, or maybe he makes a binding vow that lets him use infinite speed at the cost of giving up crack for 1 hour. Or, hold on, let's get really petty. What if it's Sukuna versus teenager Madara from the Warring States period, before he awakened the Mangekyo? That should be easy, right? What do you think? Can your goat win this?